Welcome to another episode of Life After Corporate, my friend. And if you're new to our show, welcome home. This is where successful professional women land when they've decided to make the bold move of launching a business of their own. And whether your corporate exit was your choice or the choice was made for you, today we're going to talk about what it means to grieve your former role as you are stepping into the new possibility and the unlimited future of your new company. And my guest today is Laverne McKinnon. She is a career strategist and grief recovery specialist. She loves to help ambitious, driven professionals who are in transition, whether embracing a pivot, stepping into a leadership role, or recovering from a career disruption. In Showstopper, her upcoming book, she reveals how professional heartbreaks can spark transformation, reframing setbacks as plot twists that open new possibilities for a successful career. She's a former senior executive at CBS and Epix, and she also executive produced Netflix's Girl Boss. She teaches at Northwestern University and is a mentor to the Cape Leadership Fellowship Program. Welcome to Life After Corporate, Laverne.
I'm so looking forward to our conversation. Your podcast is one of my favorites.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, we rarely talk about this and we talk about it in closed rooms. I'm sure you talk about it with your clients in coaching conversations and in our groups too, is that when you are shifting from a leadership role into entrepreneurship is a shift in your identity and it can feel like the rug was pulled out. Love to hear your perspective on this transition. I know you work with professionals in all types of different transitions professionally.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this topic of career grief because it's not something that I've actually made up myself. Bereavement experts have a category of grief called disenfranchised grief, and that's any type of grief that's not witnessed, validated, supported. And so we can feel very alone and isolated in our experiences of professional heartbreak because no one gets it. And especially if someone has left a job, whether it's of your own accord or not, and you're starting something new and you're excited about this new thing. And yet it's like, ouch, why am I still feeling like it's hard to breathe, or I'm having difficulty sleeping, or my, eating is like disrupted. And it's because, or there may be a very real possibility that there's career grief. And so a lot of people may say, wait, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, how can someone grieve over a professional loss? It's not like someone has died. And grief is a direct result of the depth of attachment that someone has had to a person, a place, or a thing. So grief is not actually reserved only for death, but it can encompass any type of loss that we've experienced in our lives.
And, you know, part of it is logical, right? It makes sense. So you've walked away from the paycheck, you've walked away from the title, you've walked away from perhaps the executive assistant, the sales force, the finance department, all of the structures that supported you in that role. And additionally, you've walked away from the reward system that let you know you were good at what you did, you know, the raises, the bonuses, all the accolades that went along with it. So let's talk about, you know, number one, the obvious forms of grief, and what are some of the less obvious forms of grief that kind of sneak up on us and may be detrimental in ways that we don't expect.
I love this question so much because as part of our grief process that we do focus on the visible things because they're tangible. And so in the work that I do, I just want to give context to this, which is that there are no rules to grief, that everyone grieves uniquely and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. However, there are tasks to grief. And the first task is what we just talked about, giving ourselves permission to mourn a loss because of the depth of attachment that we had to that person, place, or thing. And then the second task of grief is to really look at what are the losses. And so it's easy to name job, title, et cetera, all of those things that you just talked about. But underneath it are these hidden losses that, for example, like my job, when I was at CBS, and I was fired from CBS after 10 years, and it was a huge blow to me. And in losing that job, what I also lost was my identity.
Mm.
This feeling that I was competent, that I was capable, that I was successful. I lost a sense of belonging. The people that I'd worked with for 10 years, they really did, become quote unquote my work family. I celebrated holidays with them. I celebrated milestones with them. I was there to help pick them up. And so that was like a huge sense of loss. And then loss of dream, loss of possibility. Like I had a vision for my career that I was going to continue to move up that corporate ladder, and I was rewarded, and I kept moving closer and closer and closer. And then I was ousted. And so that was one of the things that I really struggled with, was loss of opportunity, loss of possibility, loss of my dream. Even though I went on to do other things that brought me great joy and great fulfillment, it doesn't necessarily take away from the ouch of having lost something that was so important to me. And so it's really critical because to look at these hidden losses, because like I just said, like I went on to a lot of different jobs, but I never dealt with the hidden losses. And then that created an opening for things like imposter syndrome, a lot of self-doubt. I lost my confidence. I lost my esteem. And I'm high functioning, so people didn't necessarily know that. But on the inside, whew, it was very, very challenging to function on a day-to-day basis until I gave myself that permission to really mourn.
Yeah. How did you come to the realization that it was the grief that was triggering these feelings of not being good enough or feeling like an imposter?
Well, a bit of a confession, because I struggled for over a decade after I was fired, and I could not figure out why I continued to have this heaviness. I had a therapist, I had a coach, I did workshops, I did retreats, I read everything about how to bounce back, how to get my mojo, like how to shift perspectives. And I can't identify the exact moment that I stumbled upon this concept of disenfranchised grief. But as soon as I did, it's like, holy cow, that's why I have been stuck and carrying the weight of these emotions, because I was looking at myself as if I was doing something wrong and that I was broken
Mm.
because I had all of these unprocessed feelings of loss, but I didn't have a name for it. So I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. And that's what high functioning women do, right? We look at ourselves. What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me that I'm feeling this way? And so it's sad that it was a 10-year and journey to come back to you, but that a beautiful nugget or kernel of wisdom crossed your path that you latched onto with this idea of career grief. So that's interesting. What happens when we don't acknowledge the grief?
Yeah, there's the symptoms of grief with career grief, very, very similar to what you might experience in other forms of grief. So there are physical manifestations of it. Some I already mentioned, like disruptions of sleep, eating. Um, there are also cognitive issues in terms of like not being able to connect dots, feeling like memory issues come up. You just don't feel quite as sharp. And then they're also like spiritual as well,
Mhm.
like an existential, like, why does this matter? Should I keep going? Like, what's my purpose? And just as a quick little tangent, many of us identify our careers as our purpose in life.
Mhm.
Our careers and our jobs are a manifestation of our purpose. And so I didn't know that when I was going through all of this. So I just felt like I don't matter anymore. Why do I even belong here? So these things get quite heavy. And then another telling one as well, similar to how other people grieve, is the things that used to bring us joy no longer bring us joy.
Mm.
And so there's some, like really strong markers that would indicate, let's slow down for a moment, push the pause button and take a look at, was there a grief event? And do I need to mourn?
Yeah. And This is so relevant right now. I have a client in one of my programs whose brother committed suicide when he lost his job because he had worked at
Mm,
the same company for 19 years and he didn't really have an identity outside of his job. And because he had worked there 20 years, nearly 20 years, he had um, no way of understanding how to find another job. Like that, it was so inconceivable to him. And his message was, I am too old to get hired and too young to
mm,
retire. And he took his own life. And that's an extreme case, right? Of grief gone unchecked or someone not being supported in this process. The other, I imagine, is also falling into addictions, trying to numb the grief and ignore that it exists. And so, why don't companies acknowledge this? I mean, isn't this something that companies who are making these layoff decisions or for people, especially with an aging workforce, and look at how many people, here we're recording this, it's June of 2025, tens of thousands of federal workers have been laid off, and many of whom in careers that they've had for decades. Where is the responsibility for supporting people? Is it left up to the individual to discover your book or to discover the grief recovery process? Or do you think that companies also hold some sort of responsibility for the psychological well-being of their employees when they exit them?
Well, first off, I'm so sorry for your client's loss. My
Mm,
heart is with
mm,
her and the family. That's really, yeah, truly, truly heartbreaking. And you ask an incredibly provocative question, and referencing federal workers. We're seeing entire industries collapse. The entertainment industry has collapsed. Tech is really suffering. I mean, we're seeing it across the board. And then we also have to identify as well that artificial intelligence is having a huge impact in shifting the way that we interact with careers and our professional lives. McKinsey released a report that I think it's something like 350 million jobs are going to be replaced by AI by 2030. Now, a lot of those people are going to be able to make a pivot, make a transition, but it doesn't address this underlying fact that our identities are going to be shifted, our sense of belonging, the rules that we've been operating under for decades of how to conduct ourselves professionally, how to move forward with our careers are fundamentally changing in front of us. Now,
yeah.
is there a responsibility by corporations? I think I have to look at this from a humanitarian perspective, because that's what we're really facing, is that our collective literacy around grief, and specifically career grief, is basically at zero. Like, nobody knows about this. And then we're inviting people to come back into roles or being hired, and they're carrying this weight that impacts their ability to do their jobs and to be set up successfully. So, the flip side of this, that I look at it from a corporate perspective, is through the prism of like a postmortem.
Mhm.
Because that's like language that I think corporations and organizations can understand a little bit better than, holy cow, I'm now responsible for my employees and my former employees' grief. It's like not my job.
Mhm.
However, if we look at it from a productivity perspective, from a capitalist perspective, this is hugely, hugely impactful. So a lot of corporations, if they have, a sense of social responsibility, they'll, give employees that are laid off an opportunity to work with a coach, for a couple sessions, or to find like a placement agency. But we're missing that spiritual and that emotional component that's so critical. Um, and I'm thinking about this from an entrepreneur's perspective, because I know so much of your audience are, people who've left corporate and are now launching their own businesses. So how this applies for an entrepreneur during startup is that you're going to encounter so many situations where your product launch fails. You've hired an employee that is not a match and you have to make a switch. Understanding the framework will allow you to have what I call like a good goodbye, and then to also analyze and assess what went wrong and why, but also not ignore, again, the spiritual or the emotional component to that. And so you
Yeah.
can come back to a place of wholeness and be able to move forward effectively and efficiently.
Yeah. It means nothing about you, right? Whatever works or doesn't work in the market, it has no reflection on your value as a human being. And yet our default response or reaction is, oh, what's wrong with me? Or I don't know what I'm doing. And the cycle down and the mindset uh, spirals down after that. Talk to
Yeah.
us about how to reset. What is the antidote to this grief process? How do we get out of grief? How do we, number one, recognize it, acknowledge it, and then what do we do about it once we realize that that's where we are?
And there's another common mistaken belief with grief, which is, okay, how do I get past it? How do I get over it? Hard truth. You can't get over grief. What we're doing through a mourning process is integrating the loss into our lives. And the more resistant we are to that integration, the more we're going to stay stuck. And so I love to look at rituals. We have rituals for when someone dies, a funeral, a memorial service, sitting Shiva. And what I love to do with clients is to create a bespoke ritual to honor what was lost, what was learned, how one wants to move forward. So again, we can really use a ritual to integrate the loss into our lives. I'm going to give two examples, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I worked with a writer a screenwriter. Their features, one of their favorite scripts that they ever wrote, just never got across the finish line. And this one really represented a huge heartbreak for this individual. And so we printed out the script, and she wrote a eulogy for her project. And she invited some friends, and they buried the script together. And she read this eulogy. And in part, it apologized to the project to say, I'm sorry.
Mm.
I couldn't bring you to full term. I'm never going to see the beauty of all of your possibility that is going to come to fruition. And she apologized because she felt like it was her fault. And then she said, rest in peace.
Mm.
And it was a really beautiful ceremony that helped her let go of the weight that she had been carrying about this project that was never going to see the light of day. I have another client who worked for several years in a job and was laid off. It wound up being okay in terms of the layoff. They were no longer happy in that job, but you were referencing earlier, like the structures, the systems, like that's what they really missed. My client had kept all of even though she had direct deposit, she had kept all of her check stubs, and she wound up creating this bespoke ritual that was amazing. She turned the check stubs into origami birds, and then she shredded some of the check stubs and created a nest for these origami birds. And for her, what it represented was that her dreams could still take flight, that even though she no longer had that job, she could find a new nest, a new home. And so she wanted to convert that experience that had represented financial security for her and say, that served me at that time, but now I'm ready to take some risks and to try something else. And so two very different rituals that represented two very different things. And I just wanted to share this, with you and your readers, to say that we can create any type of ritual to honor what was and now what's becoming.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a huge fan of rituals and routines
Mm,
for entrepreneurs as well. So
mm,
there's entrepreneurship is a spiritual journey. I always say it cracks your heart open 1 inch at a time. And in many ways, the corporate world doesn't honor your individuality. The corporate world enforces your conformity. And so sometimes it can be threatening and scary if there's suddenly nothing to conform to and you have to show up as an original and you don't know who the original is. And entrepreneurship, in my mind, is the ultimate form of personal and professional development and growth because it will force you to look at the belief systems that don't serve you, the habits, the behaviors, the addictions, the relationships that don't serve you. And in many ways, it is a most incredible journey. And so I would imagine that one has to, you say, not let go of the grief. The grief doesn't go away. You coexist with it. You create rituals around it. Do you also create rituals around the new you that you are becoming? And how do you acknowledge and celebrate that new identity?
One of my favorite things to do as part of the tasks of grief is to do a fresh assessment. Sometimes it's a first time assessment for people of what are your values? What is your life purpose? Because a grief event can really shake our foundation and recalibrate the things that are most important to us. So back in my CBS days, like my core values were really focused around ambition, productivity, external validation, being promoted. And then, 10 years after I was fired, I really made that move into being an entrepreneur. And wow, Deborah, your words about that experience are so spot on. Man, it's like cracking my heart open inch by inch by inch. And so I was operating under some of my old values because I didn't take the time to reassess what truly is important to me now. And wow, it's like my core values today are really centered around courage, compassion, curiosity. And as an entrepreneur, wow, I rely on those so much more than I have on because I'm not getting promoted. It's like, I'm not going to promote. I mean, I guess I could promote myself and give myself a pat on the back or something, but to realign in that way. So I think that that's a really important, and I do call that a ritual, especially around the values component of reassessing that like on a annual, every other year basis, because our values change with new data and new experiences. I'm so curious, and if you don't want to go here, that's totally okay. But have you had an experience of a grief event in your professional life?
Um, yeah, I think, my grief event, which led me to the meditation cushion, which led me to the realization that I was meant for entrepreneurship, was when I was getting a divorce. So this is, I go all in all at once. So here it was probably 2010 or so, 2011. And I realized that my 26-year marriage was coming to an end and that I had to let go. And that was a huge grieving process. That was my first meditation retreat. And I was sitting on the cushion during the Dharma talk. I could not stop crying. I mean, I was grieving the realization that I had to let go of my marriage. And then when just the pressure of what was going on in my personal life started to impact my ability to function in my career, because I was running a business unit. It was the fastest growing unit in the company. I had 53 people. I had 12 headcount open at any given point in time. I was managing $32 million of revenue with no operations leaders by my side. And I went to my boss and I said, if I were you, I would take me out of this role right now, because I need to do something that's as an individual contributor where I can focus on my personal life as well as my professional life. And he did. I mean, I was super grateful. No ding in compensation, no ding in title, but moving on to an individual contributor role that was completely unsatisfying. So, then there was that realization that, what I loved about the role I had no longer exists. And I don't like this role. It's not operating from my zone of genius. And so I went to look for other roles in the company, and I interviewed for those roles and I didn't get them. And I was someone who always got what she asked for my entire career. No one ever said no to me. I got every single job that I wanted. I didn't have to apply to 10 different jobs. I went for the job I wanted. I got the job I wanted. And it was like that for me for about 27 years. And then to finally be in a position where here I am, I'm 55 years old. I still have a lot of ambition in me. I have a lot of learning now behind me. And the people they were choosing were of a different gender and of a much different age. And so I thought, have I really, hit it? Have I aged out of my career? And that was a morning. So I hit a career cliff. I didn't I didn't get fired from my job. I wasn't laid off from my job, but I was shown that there were no more opportunities for me at this stage in my career. So that was a little bit of a loss, but I probably did not process it because I was processing so much other grief in my life at the same time. So really, the career grief took a back seat to the relationship grief and the lifestyle grief and all of the things that, you thought you were going to be with your best friend, your partner for the rest of your life, and you were going to retire together, and you had this vision that was no longer a vision. So I think that greatly overshadowed any career grief that I was feeling in that moment. And yet at the same time, I felt this intense form of freedom because I did have a new ritual. I had my meditation practice, I had my spiritual practice. And so that spiritual practice, which still sustains me today in different ways, has really been the driving force behind this expanding consciousness, which now we can get into a whole nother subject, which is this is what the world is craving right now. And part of us and how we're evolving as entrepreneurs is bringing all of us to the table. And that is, the spiritual side, the quirky side, the aspects of your personality that make you unique is in this age of AI is what is going to have you stand out and be different and be memorable and be magnetic and attract the people into your ecosystem that you truly want to work with. So I know I just answered much more than you asked, but that was an interesting question, and guests rarely ask me questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I really appreciate as well of just how there's a lot going on in your life and being able to say, yeah, it's like sometimes our focus is on these other things that are disrupting. And I also really appreciate how it wasn't that you were fired or laid off, but just a realization at that time in your life that the opportunities that you were curious about were no longer available. And I felt that in my career. And I think that's true. And you would probably know this better than I would. I read somewhere that in corporate America, women peak around 45 and men peak around 65. I certainly experienced that. Like as I hit 50, I was like, nobody wants to talk to me anymore. It's like, what? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm still capable. I'm still competent.
Yeah, I think I had a 10-year lag. So for me, it was 55. Mostly because I also spent a good deal of time in education when I first graduated from college, and business was a later career for me. I was also a later mom. I was 42 before I decided I was 40 before I decided I wanted to have a child. I was 42 before I had a child. And so all my friends were 10 years younger, and so I never really felt that 50s kind of thing. But I also knew that there was this unspoken rule or this unspoken um, ceiling that I was hitting it. So I busted through many glass ceilings, but I think busting through the glass ceiling of being a woman in her 50s who's approaching 60 is something that's unspoken, but it's felt, whether it's culturally ingrained in us or it's part of the corporate culture. But I would agree with that. But I wouldn't say I peaked at 45. I think I was more like 55 when I hit my career peak. And right now, I don't see any peak. What I see at this age and stage is how can I get creative and bring more joy and more free time in my life? And I'm personally very excited about AI because I think AI is going to allow us to do more of the human things that we truly enjoy doing by doing a bunch of the heavy lifting in the back end. So we're in a time where things are shifting so drastically from a technological perspective. from a geopolitical perspective, obviously, but I'm very curious to see how much more human we can be in this age of AI. And that, for me, and the circle that I'm hanging around with, is that we're no longer hiding the spiritual side. We're no longer hiding the creative aspects of who we are and what we believe in. We're much more willing to be upfront about that because that's a big part of our identity.
I love what you're saying about the spirituality. I I know in my life, and I see this with my clients as well, is that we typically jump into the strategic or the tactical and we ignore the spiritual, but the spiritual is the foundation, it's the springboard, it's the wind beneath our wings. And anything that we do strategically or tactically without a spiritual component, it just does not have longevity. It falls apart very, very quickly because the foundation isn't there. And so to circle back to grief and career grief, that's a critical element of the spiritual work. And I know people don't love to necessarily think about it or talk about it because it feels like, oh my God, it's so painful. And at the same time, I'm not going to say it's not painful. Of course it is, absolutely. And it's also the gateway to reconnecting with the things that are most important to us and our purpose so that we've got a really clear runway to take off and truly soar.
Absolutely. It is the soul's evolutionary journey. And
Mm.
I love your book. When does your book come out?
I am still I'm out to publishers right now. I've made a commitment. If I don't have a traditional publisher, then I will self publish. So it'll either be 2026 or realistically 2027. So I'm a little bit down the road. However, I write a lot about career grief on my Substack. And so, yeah, it's exciting to be going after that moonshot for myself.
I love that. It is that is also a spiritual journey, writing a book. So best of luck with Showstopper. How do we follow you? How do our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more or work with you on their transition journey?
Um, Two places, my website, which is lavernmckinnon.com. The best place, though, if people are familiar with Substack, is to come and become be a subscriber on Substack. I'm there under Laverne McKinnon or Moonshot Mentor, and if you become a paid member of my community, it's like I do workshops, live coaching, meditation, a big component of the work. So lots of goodies.
Wonderful. So we'll make sure that we get all those links from you so we can put them in the show notes. And Laverne, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our listeners here today.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you. It's a mini moonshot to be able to have this conversation with you.
I love that. A mini moonshot. Well, there you are, my friends, a mini moonshot for you to start your day and reach out, follow Laverne on Substack. I know I'm going to subscribe to your channel. Look forward to hearing more of what you have to say. And that's it for our show today, my friends. We will see you next time on Life After Corporate. Have a great week ahead.